Good afternoon. Welcome everyone who is our guest today. Really appreciate you taking the time out and for your speeches today. Today I am introducing one of my close friends and next door neighbor, Beth Williams. Beth Williams' career has almost all been spent in service to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. She has held senior level press and communications positions with the Pennsylvania Department of Education under the Ridge-Schweiker administration, the PA House of Representatives, and the PA Senate. Her current position is a part-time project and program coordinator with the Pennsylvania Wine Marketing and Research Program, a subject close to many of our hearts, I'm sure, and the PA Department of Agricultural Commodity Board. Beth also substitute teaches within the Elizabethtown Area School District and is a graduate of Shippensburg University. She formerly worked at the High Center for Family Business at Eatown College and Elizabethtown Area Communities That Care. She is a community leader, serving as past president and member of the Bear Creek PTO and former member of the Public Library Board of Trustees. She presently is a Big E Booster Club member and also a candidate for the school board. She and her husband Lynn have 2 teenage daughters, and please join me in welcoming Beth Williams. She's also very nervous.
Well, yeah, I told Sean that I was a little nervous, and he goes, Beth, he goes, those are never words I thought would ever come out of your mouth. And he goes, and besides that, he goes, you're talking to everybody about wine. So I'm like, okay, you're right. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is the economics of the Pennsylvania wine industry. And before we get started, to our friends under 21, this is going to be an educational experience for you because we'll be talking about economics and science.
And also fun.
Yeah. So just a little bit about the Pennsylvania Wine Marketing and Research Program. It's a commodities board of the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. It's similar to the Pennsylvania Vegetable Board, the Apple Growers, the Potato Board. They're all boards that a certain portion of their revenue goes back into the industry. And you can see another program through the Department of Agriculture. It's called PA Preferred. So you see that on a lot of like milks and eggs and cheeses that are all produced within the state. And what the Marketing Research Program does, they recommend funding of projects to promote and increase the quality, profitability, and consumer awareness of Pennsylvania wines. So what the Wine Board does is that they'll get grants from researchers. A lot of it's Penn State. They're the primary research program that is funded by us. And then what we do is the board recommends funding, and then the PLCB actually handles the funding. The board is comprised of 9 appointees, industry members, and then 4 seats appointed by the General Assembly. And as Sean talked about my background in state government, one of my favorite things about this, it's an apolitical board. It is not partisan in any way, which to me is very refreshing. And the wine board is also called a craft beverage board, and the Pennsylvania Malt Beverage Board is the other craft beverage board, and that's just known as the Pennsylvania Beer Board. And then just a little bit about the craft beverage boards. In 2016, $1 million allocation was set aside from the PLCB to help self-fund the industry. This is not tax dollars, it's all based on revenue from beer and wine sales in the Commonwealth. So just a quick little story, I've been with the wine board for 2 years, and right after I started, part of my responsibility is just to serve as government relations with different legislative leaders. So I went in just to do some visits, just kind of introduce myself, some meet and greets, and it was the day that Governor Wolf had reinstituted the mask mandate in schools, so the Capitol was just kind of going crazier than it normally was, and I had all these meetings scheduled with members of House and Senate leadership. So I go to my afternoon meeting, and I had known the chief of staff, and I said, well, I thought you for sure you were going to cancel our meeting. She goes, Beth, she goes, if you're here to talk about wine, you can stay all day. So I think it's just a fun subject to talk about other than everything else they're dealing with. And just one other quick to note before we dive into some of the economic numbers, the Department of Agriculture and Community and Economic Development, which is tourism, are the state's 2 leading industries. Here's just a little more information about the funding sources. There's the Act 39 that we had talked about, and then the producer assessments, that's where that commodity board comes in. So wine producers in the state are assessed a 20-cent per gallon fee. And then what that does, that all goes to help self-fund the industry. So here's just some examples of projects that have been funded in the past. You'll see spotted lanternfly, that's a huge one. Some leaf roll viruses, frost mitigation. So when I first started with the wine board, we had these grapes in our house, and they were kind of looking a little yucky. And so my daughter said, I wonder what's wrong with these grapes. I said, well, that might be leaf roll rot. And she goes, Mom, really? Now you're a grape expert? And then for the marketing side of things, the Pennsylvania Wine Association is our #1 marketing partner. They receive about $500,000 worth of funding from the board and from the PLCB, and all that money goes back into marketing the Pennsylvania wine brands. So we'll take a look at that later, but a lot of times if you see, like they'll do promotions within state wine and spirit stores, they do a lot of the wine trails within the state, and we'll take a look at that later. So let's look at the economics. Pennsylvania's wine industry is as old as the state itself. And just a little fact up there, William Penn actually planted a vineyard in what is now Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. Now the numbers that here we're going to talk about, this is based on a 2018 economic impact study, and that was actually a project that was funded by the board. So again, these numbers are based on 2018 data. The board is actually working on an updated economic study, which should be done next year. And then that's also going to reflect the impact of COVID on the wine industry. So the total economic impact in the state is $1.4 billion. Tax impact is $170 million. And for jobs, it's almost 10,000 jobs and $391 million in wages. And then here, this is the part of the PA Wineland from the Pennsylvania Wine Association. Those are all the wineries in the Commonwealth. And two, which I think is really neat, that I've observed, a lot of these are family-owned businesses, maybe in the 2nd and 3rd generation. And here's just some more numbers. Talking about wine being a value-added product. The wine industry doesn't just benefit the wine producers, it also benefits, as we'll see, the tourism and hospitality industry, transportation industry, hospitality industry. There's just to name a few, warehousing, all really family-sustaining jobs. And I actually was at a conference and heard something pretty neat, and it impacts really where we are today, that the conference that I was attending, that the wine industry was really even impacting that local community by having the conference at that hotel. So you think about too, like here we are at Funk in Elizabethtown, and the wine industry indirectly is supporting this business. 2 million visitors to Pennsylvania wineries a year. Tourism revenue, $476 million. And Pennsylvania ranks 5th in wine production in the country. Virginia is a leader in the wine industry, obviously California and New York too, like upstate in the Finger Lakes.
Who's 4th?
That I don't know. Well, let's go find them and beat them. And here's the, now this is based on 2020 data. One thing that I'm learning is a lot of the data is a few years behind, just because not everything always works on the calendar year like most of us think it would. Now, Mazza Vineyards, the head of the wine board is Mario Mazza, and Mazza is actually out of Northeast Pennsylvania, up in Erie. He also owns properties and businesses in New York, and he said he literally can hit a golf ball from his house to New York. But he's a huge producer, and honestly, just really one of the nicest people I've ever had the privilege to work for. Just very genuine. He studied, he went to wine school, wine college in Australia. I'm like, whoa, like, he's like really the real deal here. But then we joked too that I was on a call with him and some other folks, and I was the only one on the call without a PhD. And he goes, well, that's okay, Beth. He goes, because you can talk to people. He goes, and we have no social skills. So now that I said this is from 2020, Mario's father actually started the company, and he said this year they're on track to produce 500,000 gallons of wine. And you think about that 20 cents per gallon fee that we talked about, just think how much that invests in the industry. Here's some other, Dauphin County's one, and then the winery at Wilcox, Jamie Williams, he's also a member of the wine board. And then he also owns Hunters Valley Winery, which I think is up in Marysville off of 15. And then here locally, Nisley is in the top 10, and then Mount Hope.
Yeah, I believe, doesn't Mazza supply the grapes for Mount Hope?
Yes, and actually there's a family partnership there.
Mhm.
Yep. And then too, talking about the grapes, up in northeast Pennsylvania where Mario's business is, 90% of Welch's grapes are grown up in that part of Pennsylvania. And their high school mascot was the grape pickers. Then there's just an interesting fact too, how Pennsylvania wines have been featured in publications like Wine Enthusiast, Fortune, and Forbes magazine. Locally, here's the economic impact for Lancaster County. And when I first saw this, I thought that 408 looked a little low for jobs. So I don't really know how that data was all quantified. So that's something that I wanted for this next economic impact report. That's something I want to take a closer look at and educate myself more. So when I did the legislative visits that we had talked about, the economic report is all broken down. It has statewide data, but then it's also broken down by county. So that was helpful because then we could go into the legislative offices and show the elected officials how this really impacted their main street, which is really what they're most concerned about, and how much revenue it brought to their district. $15.7 million in wages, $70 million output. And then here, this is a snapshot from that economic impact report, just to give you just a little idea how this is broken down. Tourism is certainly huge, and manufacturing. So some fun facts about the wine industry. Pennsylvania has more wineries than covered bridges. I looked the statistic up, and I think there's 200 covered bridges in Pennsylvania. From anywhere you are in Pennsylvania, you're less than an hour from at least one winery. And we'll take a little look at that later. And then also, Pennsylvania's climate is closer to European wine regions than other American ones. And if you want to go home and tell your friends, now the climate and like geographical layout is called terroir, if you want to talk about sound intelligent to your friends.
There's our favorite, Grandview.
Yep, Grandview. So, I did a little search on the Pennsylvania Wine Association's website. You can plug in your region, which we would be like central region, and then you have like the north, northwest regions. So I did a search from where I live off of Turnpike Road, and these are all the wineries that came up when I searched within a 75-mile distance. So just to kind of give you that fact, how you're close to, you're an hour's drive from at least one winery anywhere you are in the state. And then I believe the grapes there, those are part of wine trails. So different regions may blend together. Like let's say in our region, the wine trail might be Grandview, Springgate, Moondancer, which I believe is over in York County. There's a nice one in Mannheim called Waltz Vineyards. And so that's what I have for you, just kind of a quick snapshot. So if you'd like to learn more about the industry, that's the website for the Pennsylvania Wine Association. You can build your own winery and wine trail itinerary. You can attend wine school and just learn the different terminologies, whites versus reds. And then also you can perfect your wine and food pairings as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. It was my pleasure to speak and share that information with you.
Any other questions for Beth?
Yes.
So, did you get this job before you were PTO in Bear Creek?
No, just to give you just a little quick snapshot of my career, I was very blessed to have very senior level positions very young in my career. By the time I was 30, I had worked for 2 governors and a Speaker of the House. And in between there, my kids were born, and then I just really wanted to be parenting to be my top focus at that point. So I just got really involved in activities, and I apologize to anybody who I served with on the PTO because I would run those things like I would run an event for the governor, so I always had to, it was just kind of everything I wanted, just ran with such intensity. So yeah, when I interviewed for this job, I was just sharing with Sean, they said, well, if we went into the Capitol today and asked people, when we said your name, what's the first thing people would say about you? I said, well, first off, they'd say they felt sorry for me and everything that I had to deal with when I worked there.
Other questions?
I was gonna ask, where do Pennsylvania rank, and then you answered it, and I was assuming California, Virginia, and New York. Best guess, who would be number 4? Could be New Jersey or Washington, or?
So I would definitely say California would be first.
Right.
Oregon?
Oregon.
Oregon might be
Yeah.
number 4 then. They
Yeah,
might be number
Oregon's a
4.
good one, yeah. Oregon's definitely a good one.
Okay.
How many people have been up to the Finger Lakes?
Yeah.
Imagine the Finger Lakes without wineries.
Yeah.
Let's go look at the water.
Thank you, Beth.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.